So, me caveman, let's go. Number 10. Blue Babe. In the summer of 1979, a pair of gold miners named Walter and Ruth Roman were working a claim at Pearl Creek, just outside Fairbanks, Alaska. They aimed a hydraulic hose at the frozen muck to wash it away, and the warm water melted through the permafrost. What emerged was not gravel. It was a leg. Attached to that leg was an entire animal, stained a deep, bruised blue, that had been lying in the ice for 36,000 years. The animal was a steppe bison, a species called Bison priscus, an extinct ancestor of the bison alive today. Word reached a paleontologist named Dale Guthrie at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and he understood at once what he was looking at. He excavated the carcass fast, before it could rot in the open air. The unsettling blue color had a simple cause. A mineral called vivianite, an iron phosphate, forms a blue crust on tissue that decays in wet, cold, oxygen-starved ground. The miners had joked about Paul Bunyan's blue ox, and the name Blue Babe stuck. Then, Guthrie found the marks. Across the animal's back and rear were parallel scratches. In the skin were tooth punctures. Lodged in the neck was a fragment of a tooth, and it belonged to Panthera atrox, the giant American lion of the Ice Age. Blue Babe had been ambushed and killed by a lion. The preservation was so complete that pockets of blood had coagulated at the base of the claw and canine wounds. Guthrie reconstructed the whole event. The bison was killed in late autumn. The lions ate part of it. Then the carcass froze solid before anything else could touch it, and it stayed frozen for hundreds of centuries. That timing is the entire reason the flesh survived. Muscle that had not been eaten had turned the texture and color of beef jerky. And here the story takes its strangest turn. In 1984, to mark the mummy being prepared for display, Guthrie and his team cut a piece of meat from the neck and cooked it into a stew. They ate it. By their account, it was tough and smelled of the earth, and no one fell ill. Blue Babe stands today in the Museum of the North in Fairbanks, one of only a handful of near-complete Ice Age bison ever found. It is a predator and prey drama frozen in the middle of the act. And if the ice can hold a whole animal for 36,000 years, the obvious question is what else it is keeping. Number 9. The Severed Ice Age Wolf Head. In the summer of 2018, a man named Pavel Yefimov was walking the bank of the Terechtiak River in Yakutia, in the far northeast of Siberia, close to the Arctic Circle. In the thawing ground, he saw something with fur. When he pulled it free, he was holding the head of a wolf. Only the head. It ended cleanly at the neck, as though it had been cut, and it looked as if the animal had died recently. It had died 40,000 years ago. The preservation was almost unbelievable. The fur was intact. So were the ears, the teeth, the tongue, and the facial tissue. Inside the skull, the brain was still there. The head measured about 40 centimeters, roughly 16 inches, which is longer than half the entire body of a modern wolf. This had been a very large animal, a Pleistocene wolf that may have belonged to a distinct Ice Age population. It was fully grown, somewhere between 2 and 4 years old when it died. The first question everyone asks is who cut off the head. The answer is almost certainly no one. There is little sign that people lived in that region 40,000 years ago. Researchers believe the head was separated naturally by the slow grinding of ice and the decay of the body, leaving the head to sink into the freezing ground while the rest was lost. The specimen went to Albert Protopopov of the Academy of Sciences of the Republic of Sakha, one of the leading experts on Yakutia's frozen fauna. Samples traveled to laboratories in Japan and Sweden, including the Center for Paleogenetics in Stockholm, where scientists study the ancient DNA of wolves and the origins of domestic dogs. This is the first intact head of a fully grown Ice Age wolf ever recovered at this level of preservation. Using computed tomography scanning, researchers imaged the preserved brain without cutting the specimen open at all. There is a reason so many of these finds are surfacing now. This is one of the coldest inhabited places on the planet, and its deep permafrost is a natural freezer. As the climate warms, that ground is thawing and giving up its dead along the riverbanks. Many of the finds are made by hunters searching the mud for mammoth ivory, and the same stretch of Siberia has produced more than a severed head. Not far away, the ice handed over whole babies. Number 8. Lyuba, the frozen baby mammoth. In May of 2007, a Nenets reindeer herder named Yuri Kuti and his sons were traveling near the Yuri Bay River on the Yamal Peninsula in northwest Siberia when they came upon a small body in the thawing ground. It was a baby woolly mammoth, a calf of the species Mammothus primigenius, and she had died 42,000 years ago. They named her Lyuba, the Russian word for love. She is the most complete and best preserved mammoth ever found. Her skin was intact. So was some of her hair, her trunk, her ears, her eyes, and her internal organs. She had been about 1 month old when she died, weighing around 50 kilograms and standing roughly 85 centimeters tall. Her stomach still held her mother's milk. It also held her mother's dung, which she had eaten to seed her gut with the bacteria needed to digest food, exactly the behavior seen in baby elephants today. How she died is written in her own body. Sediment was packed into her trunk and airways. She had most likely suffocated in mud or a river while trying to cross, then sank and froze. After death, bacteria that produced lactic acid colonized her body and effectively pickled her, which is why her skin came out of the ground, firm and tanned like leather rather than rotted away. The Russian mammoth scientist Alexei Tikhonov of the Zoological Institute in St. Petersburg was among those who studied her. She was carried to Japan and placed inside a computed tomography scanner, which imaged her skeleton, her organs, and a healthy layer of fat, including a hump of brown fat behind her head that helped her survive Arctic cold. For the first time, scientists could study the soft tissue anatomy of a mammoth directly, instead of guessing from bones. Her journey was not smooth. After she was found, she was briefly bartered away and even gnawed by dogs before she was recovered for science. She has since been displayed at the Shemanovsky Museum in Zalakard and traveled the world, including the Field Museum in Chicago, and National Geographic told her story in 2009. Growth lines in her teeth and tusk buds revealed her age. She confirmed how mammoth calves developed and nursed. Lyuba is a nursing infant that looks as though she died last winter, and she is older than the last ice age. But preservation like this is not reserved for the gentle and the young. The same permafrost froze the hunters too. Number 7. The frozen cave lion cubs. The cave lion, Panthera spelaea, is gone. It once ranged across Ice Age Eurasia and into North America, an apex predator that vanished thousands of years ago. And yet, in the permafrost near the Semyuelyak River in Yakutia, 2 of its cubs came out of the ground, looking as though they were only sleeping. Their finders named them Boris and Sparta. Boris was discovered in 2017, Sparta in 2018, lying about 15 meters apart. The natural assumption is that they were litter mates. They were not. Sparta died about 28,000 years ago. Boris died about 43,448 years ago. They were separated by roughly 15,000 years. 2 cubs from utterly different eras who happened to come to rest in the same patch of frozen earth. Sparta is female, Boris male, and both were only 1 to 2 months old when they died. Sparta is, in the words of the researchers who studied her, possibly the best preserved Ice Age animal ever found. Her fur, her skin, her teeth, her whiskers, her soft tissue, her organs, and her skeleton are all present, undamaged, apart from a little ruffling of the coat. The work, which involved Love Delan of the Center for Paleogenetics in Stockholm, was published in the journal Quaternary in 2021. Scanners revealed the cub's skulls, teeth, and soft tissue, and allowed comparison with modern lion cubs. Sparta's coat was a grayish light brown, and researchers debated whether faint markings were present. Their nearly perfect condition points to a fast burial, perhaps a mudslide or a den collapse that sealed them from the air and from scavengers in an instant. Boris was slightly crushed, which fits sediment falling in on him. Albert Protopopov's team led the Russian analysis. There is a poignant detail here. Cave lions appear, painted on the walls of Ice Age European caves, drawn by people who saw them alive. These frozen cubs are the real animals behind those drawings, whiskers and all. The thawing permafrost is why they surfaced now, and their milk teeth confirmed how young they were. But sometimes a specimen does not need ice to disturb us. Sometimes the anomaly is a single hole in a skull that has no business existing. Number 6. The Kabwe Skull. In June of 1921, miners were digging lead and zinc ore deep at Broken Hill in what is now Kabwe, Zambia. A Swiss miner named Tom Svieglar broke into a chamber and found a fossil skull staring back at him. It was heavy, with one of the largest brow ridges of any human relative ever discovered. It was first named Homo rhodesiensis, and today it is usually placed within Homo heidelbergensis. For a long time, no one knew how old it was, because the mine that produced it was consumed by the mining itself, and its exact layer was lost. In 2020, a study in the journal Nature finally dated the skull directly to about 299,000 years old. That was younger than many had assumed, and it meant this archaic human overlapped in time with the earliest members of our own species in Africa. But the age is not what makes people stop and stare. On the left side of the skull is a small, clean, almost perfectly round hole, about 7 to 8 millimeters across. On the opposite side, the bone is shattered outward, as though the skull was struck from within. To some, that looks like one thing only: a bullet wound. A fringe claim has circulated for decades that the Kabwe skull was shot, and that if it was shot, it cannot possibly be 300,000 years old. The science does not support it. A high-velocity modern bullet leaves radiating cracks around its entry hole, and there are none. There are no traces of metal. The mainstream explanations are a disease, an infection or abscess eating through the bone, or damage that happened after death. And the truth is grim enough without a rifle. This individual suffered severe dental disease, with cavities and abscesses across many teeth, some of the oldest evidence of such widespread tooth decay in the human record. A lesion near the ear hints at a chronic infection that may have helped kill him. The skull is held at the Natural History Museum in London, and there are ongoing discussions about returning it to Zambia. The whole endures as an internet legend because it looks so uncannily modern to an untrained eye. And that is the real lesson. If a genuine hominin skull can fool people for a century, then a fossil can absolutely look alive. Number 5. The Borealopelta Nodosaur. On the 21st of March, 2011, a shovel operator named Sean Funk was digging at the Suncor Millennium Mine in the oil sands of Alberta, Canada, when his bucket struck something that was not rock. It was a dinosaur, and it did not look like a fossil. It looked like a statue of a living animal that had fallen asleep 110 million years ago. The species was named Borealopelta Mark-Michelli. The first part means Northern Shield. The second part honors Mark Mitchell, the museum technician who spent more than 7,000 hours, roughly 5 years, painstakingly freeing the animal from the hard marine stone. Borealopelta is a nodosaur, a heavily armored plant eater from the early Cretaceous. It is described as the best preserved armored dinosaur ever found, and one of the finest dinosaur specimens in the world. What sets it apart is that it is not flattened. It is preserved in 3 dimensions. keeping the true shape of its body from snout to hips, with the skin still wrapped over its armor, the keratin sheaths of its plates intact, and its shoulder spikes in place. How does a land animal end up so perfectly preserved? It died at sea. Its bloated carcass floated out into an ancient seaway, then sank and settled on the low oxygen seabed, where fine sediment sealed it away before it could fall apart. It was described in 2017 by Caleb Brown of the Royal Tyrrell Museum. Then the chemistry got stranger. Scientists detected preserved melanin, the pigment, in its skin. From that, they reconstructed its coloring and found countershading, a dark reddish-brown back fading to a lighter belly. That is camouflage. Think about what that means. This animal weighed around 1,300 kilograms and was covered in bony armor and spikes, and it still needed to hide. Whatever predators stalked the early Cretaceous were fearsome enough to force a walking tank into disguise. The reddish-brown color was confirmed by sulfur-bearing compounds and mass spectrometry, and even its last meal survived. A gut full of ferns with traces of charcoal, suggesting it had been feeding in a recently burned landscape in late spring or summer. Borealopelta rests today in the Royal Tyrrell Museum in Drumheller, letting researchers study the true living outline of an armored dinosaur. A quick, oxygen-starved burial at sea preserved a creature from deep time, but preservation can also capture a moment far more intimate than biology. It can freeze a human ceremony. Number 4. The Children of Llullaillaco. On the summit of a volcano called Llullaillaco, on the border of Argentina and Chile, at about 6,739 meters, over 22,000 feet above the sea, an expedition led by the archaeologist Johann Reinhard and his colleague Constanza Cerruti made a discovery in March of 1999 that is difficult to look at. They found 3 children, buried in one of the highest archaeological sites on Earth, and preserved so well they appeared to be asleep. There were 3. A girl of about 13, known as the Maiden, a boy of about 4 to 7, and a younger girl of about 4 to 5, called Lightning Girl. They had died roughly 500 years ago in an Inca rite called Capacocha, a sacrifice carried out on high mountains. The bitter cold, the thin, dry air, and the low oxygen of the summit had dried their bodies naturally, and the result is a preservation better than any deliberate embalming. The maiden sits with her cheek resting on her shoulder, her skin, her organs, her blood, and her hair intact. Human hair records what a person consumed, month by month, and so the children's hair became a diary of their final year. It showed that in the last 12 months of their lives, they were fed increasing amounts of maize and coca, foods that marked ritual and elite status. In the final weeks, the maiden consumed a great deal of coca leaf and chicha, a maize beer, and a wad of coca was still tucked in her cheek when she was found. A team led by Andrew Wilson reconstructed this timeline in a study published around 2013. The alcohol and the coca most likely sedated the children, and the evidence suggests the maiden slipped into unconsciousness rather than dying in fear. Scans showed her organs intact, including a lung that may have carried an infection. The children were dressed in fine textiles and surrounded by grave goods, small figurines of gold and silver and spondylus shell, feathered headdresses, and pottery. They had probably been chosen for their beauty and brought hundreds of kilometers through the Inca capital of Cusco to the mountain. Today, they are kept in climate-controlled cases at the Museum of High-Altitude Archaeology in Salta, and their display raises hard ethical questions about exhibiting sacrificed children. They look 500 years too young for the grave. And preservation, it turns out, does not always need ice. Sometimes it works in solid stone. Number 3. Altamura Man. In October of 1993, cavers were exploring the Lammalunga cave near the town of Altamura in southern Italy when their lights fell on a human skeleton wedged in a deep pit among the stalactites. It was almost entirely complete, nearly every bone in place. It was also, quite literally, part of the cave. The bones were coated in a thick crust of calcite, knobbly and white like cave popcorn, and that mineral growth had fused the skeleton to the rock around it. This is a Neanderthal, and it is the most complete skeleton of a single archaic human ever found. Uranium-thorium dating of the calcite places him somewhere between 130,000 and 187,000 years old. In 2015, a team led by Fabio Di Vincenzo and Giorgio Manzi at Sapienza University of Rome managed to extract DNA from a fragment of his shoulder blade, and it is among the oldest Neanderthal DNA ever sequenced. His skull carries the classic Neanderthal features, the heavy face and brow, with some traits that mark him as an early member of the lineage. The story of how he got there is a quiet tragedy. He most likely fell into the sinkhole, could not climb back out, and died alone in the dark. But because he fell into a sealed pit, no scavengers came to scatter his bones. Instead, water dripped over him for tens of thousands of years, laying down mineral after mineral, slowly turning him into a feature of the cave. His eye sockets are filled with coral like growths of calcite, giving the skull an encrusted, staring look that is genuinely hard to forget. He is so fragile and so thoroughly cemented into the stone that removing him would likely destroy him. So he has been left where he lies, studied through photographs, scans, and tiny samples, with access to the chamber tightly restricted to protect him. His completeness offers something rare, the chance to study an entire archaic human body rather than a scatter of isolated bones, and he informs the debate over when and how Neanderthals evolved in Europe. Casts and reconstructions let museums show him without ever touching the original. A human being slowly becoming rock sounds like something from a story, but catastrophe can preserve in ways stranger still. It can take the softest organ in the body and turn it into glass. Number 2. The vitrified brain of Herculaneum. When Mount Vesuvius erupted in the year 79, it buried the Roman town of Herculaneum alongside its famous neighbor Pompeii. In a building called the Collegium Augustaleum, dedicated to the worship of the Emperor Augustus, a young man lay face down on a wooden bed. He was in his mid-20s. He was excavated in the 1960s. But the truly extraordinary thing about him was not noticed for decades. A forensic anthropologist named Pier Paolo Petrone of the University of Naples, Federico II, was examining the body when he saw something glinting inside the shattered skull. Black, glassy shards, like fragments of obsidian. When his team analyzed them, they reached a conclusion no one had ever reached before. The shards were the man's brain, turned to glass. This is the only known case in the world of a naturally vitrified human brain. Vitrification means a material was heated and then cooled so quickly that it hardened into glass instead of forming crystals. The team published their work in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2020 and in greater detail in the journal PLOS ONE. Under an electron microscope, they found preserved neurons and axons inside the glass, complete with the regular banding of the myelin that wraps nerve fibers. They detected proteins and fatty acids characteristic of brain tissue. To produce glass from a brain requires a temperature of at least around 500 degrees Celsius, followed by very rapid cooling. A study in 2025 argued that a super hot but short-lived cloud of ash reached the body first, delivering a brief, extreme burst of heat that then cooled fast. Consider how improbable this is. The brain is one of the first organs to liquefy after death. A preserved brain of any kind is remarkable. A brain preserved as glass is unique in the history of the planet, something scientists had never seen occur naturally and have never found since. It gave researchers a direct look at human neural structures 2,000 years old, and it sets Herculaneum apart from Pompeii, where the famous casts are simply hollows left in the ash. The heat that killed this man in an instant also fossilized the physical substance of his mind. Everything on this list so far has been a preserved death. The number one entry is not dead at all. Number 1. The revived permafrost nematodes. Near the Kolyma River, in the northeastern Arctic of Siberia, scientists pulled a block of permafrost from the ground in 2002. Sealed inside it, tucked within the fossilized burrow of an ancient ground squirrel, were tiny roundworms, a kind of nematode. Around 2018, researchers isolated those worms from the frozen soil. Plant material sealed in the same burrow was dated to about 46,000 years old. These worms had been lying in the ground since the age of mammoths, cave lions, and Neanderthals. And then they woke up. When the frozen material was gently thawed in the laboratory, the nematodes revived. They began to move. They began to eat. They began to reproduce. Genome sequencing revealed that they belonged to a species new to science, named Panagrolimus kolymaiensis after the river. The work was led by Anastasia Shatilovich and a team of collaborators, and it was published in the journal PLOS Genetics on the 27th of July, 2023, with contributions from the Max Planck Institute of Molecular Cell Biology and Genetics and the University of Cologne. How can an animal survive 46,000 years? Through a state called cryptobiosis, in which its metabolism drops so low it cannot be measured at all. The creature is neither fully alive nor truly dead. It simply pauses. To do it, the worms produce a sugar called trehalose that shields their cells as they freeze and dry out. When researchers compared their genome to the famous laboratory worm Caenorhabditis elegans, they found the same genetic tools for entering this dormant state. Drying the worms gently before freezing them made them more likely to survive. The numbers here break the imagination. The previous record for this kind of suspended animation in nematodes was on the order of 25 to 40 years. These worms beat it by a factor of more than 1,000. And because they can reproduce without mates, a single survivor could rebuild an entire population. The find forces a genuine question about the limits of life and how long biological time can be put on hold. It also carries a note of caution, because thawing permafrost could release other dormant organisms, mostly harmless. But the principle gives some scientists pause. These worms are less than 1 millimeter long, easy to overlook, and almost impossible to believe. Every other find on this list is a preserved death, a body that time forgot to erase. This one is different. This is ancient life that stopped, waited out the entire span of human history, and started living again. Look across all 10 of these finds, and a strange rule emerges. Preservation is not gentle. The bodies that survive intact are almost never the ones that died peacefully. They are the ones caught in something sudden and extreme. A quiet death rots. A violent, immediate, or extreme one can save you for 40,000 years. The agents keep repeating: cold, drought, a lack of oxygen, rapid burial, and flash heat. Blue Babe, the wolfhead, Lyuba, and the cave lion cubs were all frozen before decay could begin. The Children of Llullaillaco were freeze-dried by cold and thin, dry mountain air. Altamura Man was sealed in dripping mineral water. Borealopelta was buried on an airless seabed. The man at Herculaneum was flash-heated and cooled in a moment. The nematodes were frozen in a way that paused their lives rather than ending them. Speed is the deciding factor. Slow exposure to air and warmth destroys a body completely. Fast sealing preserves it. And what gets captured is never a slow fade. It is a single instant frozen mid-event. A lion's kill, a child's ceremony, a city's last day. The rarest thing of all is soft tissue. Bones are common in the fossil record. Skin, fur, organs, and brains are not. That is why the reaction to these finds is so often disbelief. Our instinct tells us that time erases everything soft, and almost always, it is right. These 10 are the exceptions that prove how completely the rest of us disappear. It is worth pausing on how, exactly, each of these bodies cheated decay, because the mechanisms are as strange as the finds. Blue Babe's eerie color came from vivianite, an iron phosphate that crusts blue on tissue in cold, wet, oxygen-poor ground. Lyuba was saved by bacteria that produce lactic acid, which pickled her and tanned her skin instead of rotting it. Permafrost is the workhorse, ground frozen solid for thousands of years, cold enough to halt the microbes that would otherwise consume a carcass. At altitude, the process shifts to freeze drying, where moisture leaves the body directly as vapor in the thin, dry air, which is what happened to the children on Llullaillaco. Altamura Man was preserved by the opposite of dryness, by water dripping through limestone and laying down calcite crystal by crystal until the skeleton was entombed. Borealopelta kept its very pigment, melanin, and even the pattern of its camouflage, because a fast seabed burial protected the chemistry of its skin. The strangest mechanism of all is vitrification, the glass transition, where intense heat followed by rapid cooling freezes a substance into glass, in this case a human brain. And the nematodes relied on trehalose and the suspended state of cryptobiosis. Underlying all of it is a single truth about why soft tissue almost never lasts. After death, the body's own enzymes and its bacteria begin to break it down within hours, and the brain, being soft and rich, is among the first things to go. Oxygen feeds those microbes, so the settings that preserve are the ones that starve them: cold, dry, sealed, or airless. Scientists read these bodies with radiocarbon and uranium thorium dating to find their ages, and with scanners and electron microscopes to look inside without destroying them. Preservation, in the end, is simply chemistry stopped at exactly the right instant. You may have noticed how many of these finds come from one place. Yakutia and the wider Siberian Arctic have produced the wolf head, the cave lion cubs, Lyuba, and the revived worms. The reason is geography. This is home to some of the deepest, most continuous permafrost on the planet. A natural freezer running for tens of thousands of years without pause. And there is a reason they are appearing now in such numbers. The climate is warming, and that ancient ground is thawing, exposing carcasses along riverbanks that have been hidden since the Ice Age. Many are found not by scientists, but by hunters searching the thawing mud for mammoth ivory, a trade that sends people combing the permafrost every summer. The melting reveals everything together: wolves and cubs and mammoths, and, in the case of the nematodes, living microbes. That last part introduces a genuine question. What else is thawing out? The revived worms are harmless, and the vast majority of organisms released by melting permafrost are ordinary microbes and invertebrates. But other teams have revived ancient viruses that infect amoeba, which is enough to make researchers watch carefully. There is a race underway, too, because the same thaw that reveals these finds also threatens to rot them before they can be studied. And the finds bring ethical weight: the debate over displaying sacrificed children at Llullaillaco, the discussions about returning the Kabwe Skull to Zambia, and the growing role of indigenous communities in deciding what happens to remains. Discovery and loss, unsettlingly, are arriving at the same time. For all that these finds reveal, each one leaves a thread hanging. We do not know how common it was for American lions to bring down steppe bison across the plains of Beringia, the way they killed Blue Babe. We do not know exactly how the Siberian wolf lost its head, or where the rest of its body went. We cannot say how well Lyuba represents mammoth development as a whole, or whether cave lions like Sparta and Boris wore markings, and how they hunted. The Kabwe skull still guards its central mystery. Was that neat round hole caused by infection, by injury, or by damage after death? Borealopelta raises the question of which predators were terrible enough to force camouflage onto an armored giant. At Llullaillaco, we still do not fully know how the children were chosen, or precisely where they came from. With Altamura Man, the question is whether more DNA can ever be recovered without destroying a skeleton fused into stone. At Herculaneum, researchers are still arguing over the exact temperature curve that turned a brain to glass. And the nematodes pose perhaps the largest question of all: the true upper limit of suspended animation. Running underneath all of them is one more unknown. How many comparable finds are eroding out of the permafrost and the cliffs right now, unseen, and vanishing before anyone reaches them? These specimens are not closed cases. They are open doors, and most of what lies beyond them is still dark. Set them side by side one last time. A whole bison stained blue. A wolf's face without its body. A nursing calf. 2 cubs from different millennia. A skull with an impossible hole. A dinosaur that looks carved rather than fossilized. 3 children who seem to be sleeping. A Neanderthal grown into a cave wall. A brain turned to glass. And a handful of worms that simply woke up. Every one of them breaks the ordinary rule that time dissolves everything soft and leaves only bone. They survive because some catastrophe seized a single instant and refused to let it fade. To stand in front of them is not to look at a reconstruction or an artist's guess. It is to look straight into deep time, at the real thing, and to feel the distance between now and 40,000 or even 110 million years ago collapse to nothing. Part of the horror is simple recognition. These were living things, and some of them were people, as alive once as anyone watching. Part of the wonder is that anything at all made the crossing intact. Preservation like this is rare, accidental, and shrinking as the ice pulls back. We may be the first humans able to meet these faces, and as the permafrost melts, among the last. What survives is only a fraction of everything that ever lived. A few messages with no sender, addressed to whoever happens to dig them up. And they leave us with a single, quiet thought. The past is not always gone. Sometimes it is only sleeping,